Nothing will make sense to your American ears, and you will doubt everything that we do. But in the end, you will understand. Understand that Mexican death metal scene kicks fucking ass. Welcome to Daily Metal, where every day a different metal album gets dissected for your sadistic listening pleasure. I'm the heavy metal lawyer Emma, and in this show I'll talk about why the music in these albums is so good and where they fall in the history of music's most wretched genre. On July 6, in 1993, Brujeria smuggled 2 tons of death grind into our ears with their debut full-length Matando Güeros. Matando meaning killing and Güeros being a derogatory word for white people like cracker or whitey. Brujeria formed in Tijuana, Baja California, in Mexico, which by 1993 was well established as one of the largest border crossing sites on the U.S.-Mexican border. In addition to the album's name, the cover art features a decapitated and burned head, and the band members all took on the names and personas of Mexican drug lords. If none of this made it clear enough, the album begins with a sketch acting out a bratty American attempting to buy cocaine and trying to rip off the Mexican dealers who are selling it, leading him to presumably be killed by them with a machete. When Matando Güeros came out, border apprehensions of illegal crossings had reached a historic high, which it would do again and again until the current historic peak that happened in the year 2000. Tijuana, and thus Brujeria, was in the center of a geopolitical crisis involving corruption, drugs, neoliberalism, racism, and xenophobia. In 1994, Luis Donaldo Colosio Murrieta, a candidate for president in Mexico, was assassinated in Tijuana. In 1989, the Tijuana cartel formed out of the dissolution of the Guadalajara cartel, and in 1993, they attempted to murder El Chapo and instead killed a Catholic cardinal and several others. NAFTA was signed in 1992 and came into effect in 1994, leading a group of indigenous farmers in Chiapas and veteran revolutionaries to come out publicly as the Zapatista Army of National Liberation. The combination of exploitation by capitalism and oppression by a corrupt government and drug cartels has made Tijuana a brutal place to live. So it is no surprise that Brujeria's music is unrelentingly brutal. While it certainly wasn't uncommon for death grind bands in the early 90s like Napalm Death, Carcass, and Brutal Truth to try to sound as heavy as possible and sing about oppression and violence, there is something much more visceral in Brujeria's music. While the wage slavery that Brutal Truth and Napalm Death sang about, or the medical horrors that Carcass sang about, were all pretty brutal, the unflinching description of violence by Brujeria is a measure more intense than the subjects of its colleagues. As I've said in a prior video, some grindcore inspires eye rolls with silly, fictional scenarios of extreme obscenity. And to me, the music of Brujeria is so much more disturbing because it is very real. The decapitations in Sacrificio, the drug trafficking in Narcos Satanicos, the gunfights, the kidnappings in Les Narcos, the rapes in Molestando Niños Muertos, the deportations and incarcerations, these were all part of life in Tijuana and remain so despite a lot of gentrification there in the last few years. Brujeria does not need to embellish these horrors or try to make them edgy, and notably through the horrors, Brujeria remains extremely proud of being Mexican, shouting out Mexican revolutionary Pancho Villa and chanting Viva Mexico in the title track of the album.
Similar to gangster rap and trap music in the United States, I'm thinking in particular the albums Original Gangster by Ice-T and Trap Music by T.I. Brujeria takes on their drug lord personas without apology, but also without any romanticization, as a way for them to live out a fantasy where they can destroy their American oppressors. The fantasy element is made clear by the frequent references to Satanism, Santeria, indigenous religions, and witchcraft, very controversial topics in the 96% Christian city of Tijuana. The last song of the album, Cristo de la Raca, featuring a drug trafficker proclaiming himself Christ, hints that the band's embrace of brujeria is due to the hypocrisy they saw between a place so victimized by vice and yet so religiously Christian, that in reality whoever had the power could declare themselves Christ, and thus the band had to make themselves witchcraft-wielding narco-terrorists in order to gain control of their world. Matando's Güeros is grindcore at its best, afflicting the comfortable and comforting the afflicted. So, do you think Mexican drug cartels are the most brutal subject in grindcore? Or maybe you'd give that title to bands that sing about an actual military dictatorship, like some of the best metal bands out in Brazil. Let me know what you think in the comments, and if you like this video, please subscribe so you can find out what the metal album of the day is, why it is so brutal, and where it fits in the history of the genre.